A quiet black student gets mocked in class, and the teacher says nothing. But the next morning, what she does leaves the entire classroom speechless. The clock ticked steadily toward noon, its gentle rhythm swallowed by the rustle of papers and the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Outside, the sun poured through the classroom windows in long golden streaks, casting warm patterns across the linoleum floor. Birds chirped faintly beyond the glass, a distant reminder of a world still gentle and bright. But inside room 214, a heaviness lingered unspoken, yet ever present. At the third desk from the back, near the window, sat Elijah. He was 12 years old, with eyes that seemed too deep for his age, like they had seen more than they should. His skin was the color of deep bronze, and his hair was neatly twisted into short coils. He wore a plain gray hoodie, sleeves tugged low over his wrists, and sat with his spine straight, never slouching, never drawing attention. His expression was calm, but guarded. Eyes always alert, scanning, listening not for opportunity, but for warning. Elijah had only been at North Haven Middle School for 2 weeks, transferred from another district, his third school in the past. 2 years he had quickly learned how to move through hallways like a shadow, speak only when spoken to, sit where no one else wants to, keep your head down, keep your heart quieter. He wasn't unfriendly, just cautious. In class, he always completed his assignments on time. His handwriting was neat, careful. He asked thoughtful questions when he did speak, but rarely raised his hand. He was respectful to teachers, offering a quiet good morning or a nod, and always whispered thank you when handed a worksheet. But at lunch, he sat alone. Every day, the same table in the far left corner of the cafeteria, just close enough to hear other kids laughing, but far enough that no one ever joined him. He ate slowly, deliberately, like he was trying to stretch the moment. Sometimes he would take out a pencil and doodle lightly on napkins tiny sketches of buildings, faces, sometimes birds in flight, before tossing them into the trash. As he left, the other students didn't really know Elijah. They noticed him, of course. He was hard to miss. Not because he was loud, but because of how still he was, how controlled. In a sea of noise, he was silence. That made some kids curious, others uncomfortable. And some chose to mock what they didn't understand. But not yet. Not obviously. Not in the open. For now, it was just whispers, side eyes, chuckles after he walked past, a low snicker when he asked to borrow a pencil. Words not loud enough to be heard by teachers, but clear enough to sting. The classroom itself felt ordinary on the surface. Posters lined the walls, historical figures, multiplication tricks, a colorful chart labeled growth mindset. Desks were arranged in pairs, though Elijah's seat was often unpaired, his table mate absent more than present. The teacher's desk sat neatly in the corner, beside a whiteboard filled with goals and vocabulary words. But despite the warm light and cheerful decor, something colder lingered in the room. It wasn't the kind of cold that came from air vents or temperature. It was the cold of silence, the kind that fills a space where understanding is absent, where assumptions go unchallenged. A quietness that carried weight. The teacher, Ms. Thompson, was efficient and articulate, with a reputation for fairness. Her tone was calm but firm. She called on students equally, gave clear directions, and rarely raised her voice. She noticed when kids forgot their homework, but whether she noticed Elijah, no one could tell. She never corrected the students who laughed when Elijah spoke too softly, never commented on the glances or smirks, never asked why no one partnered with him for science experiments. But she watched. Occasionally, her eyes would linger on Elijah longer than necessary, just a beat too long before she turned away. Like she was waiting for something. Elijah noticed, of course. He noticed everything. He noticed how Miss Thompson gave high fives to other students, but never offered him one. He noticed how the class quieted when he answered a question, then erupted back into chatter as soon as he finished. He noticed how some kids flinched when he walked by, as if his presence was unexpected, even unwelcome, and still he said nothing, because Elijah knew how quickly standing out could become standing alone. So he kept his head down, finished his math, wrote quiet essays in crisp, clean paragraphs, smiled politely when spoken to, never asked to go to the bathroom twice in one day, never complained, never cried, but inside a small voice echoed, steady and soft, "How long do I have to be invisible before someone sees me?" It was a Wednesday, just after lunch, when the teasing first took shape. The classroom smelled faintly of peanut butter sandwiches and pencil shavings. The students filed in with half-hearted energy, dragging their sneakers across the floor, laughing in small groups. Elijah walked in last as usual, head low, backpack hugged tightly to his side. He took his seat by the window without a word, opening his notebook, already flipping to the page where they'd left off in science. The sunlight streamed over his desk, highlighting the quiet discipline in the way he arranged his things, pen on the right, eraser on the left, hands folded neatly in the center. Then came the voice. Just loud enough to be heard. "Your hair looks weird." The words drifted from behind him, light, almost playful, but with a sharp edge. It came from Zach, one of the louder boys in class, always flanked by two others who laughed before he even finished his sentence. His tone was careless, but his eyes gleamed. Elijah didn't turn around, didn't answer. His fingers twitched, just for a second, and then went still. Ms. Thompson didn't seem to notice. She was by the whiteboard, uncapping a marker. "Why do you talk so proper?" Zach added, snorting. "Like you're trying to be on TV or something." Another laugh. A few students chuckled under their breath, not all malicious, just unsure. Riding the wave of middle school cruelty, disguised as humor, Elijah's shoulders stiffened. Not dramatically, just a subtle tightening, like a drawstring pulled gently at the edges. No one said anything. No one stopped it. Not even Lena, who was seated diagonally across the room. She had seen Zach whisper something earlier, had watched Elijah's reaction. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair now, her pencil paused mid-scribble. Her eyes flicked between Zach and Elijah, and then she looked away. There was a tension in her posture, a tightness in her jaw. She didn't laugh, but she didn't speak either, because what if they turned on her next? The next day, it continued. This time, it was Zach's friend Jaden who leaned toward Elijah as he unzipped his backpack. "Did your mom get that from a thrift store?" he whispered, nodding at the worn fabric and frayed zipper. Elijah didn't respond. He didn't even blink. He just placed the backpack under his desk with quiet precision, as though the comment hadn't landed, but it had. His hands lingered a second longer on the bag. Then he picked up his pencil and stared at his open notebook without writing a word. The laughter this time was softer, but it spread. Not everyone joined in, but no one stopped it. Ms. Thompson called the class to attention, her voice calm, even cheerful. "All right, everyone, eyes up here." Elijah lifted his head. His face was still. His eyes, however, were distant. Lena was watching again. From her seat, she could see how Elijah's mouth was set in a firm line, how he gripped his pencil too tightly. She had never heard him speak above a whisper, never seen him raise his hand twice in the same day. But she noticed things, like how he always waited until everyone left the room before packing his things. Or how his lunchbox was the same each day, plain, spotless, like it had been packed with care. Or how he once gave up his spot in line quietly when a younger student got confused and cut in front of him. Lena noticed. She wanted to say something, but middle school was its own kind of wilderness, where kindness could mark you as prey. So she stayed quiet. And the teasing grew, not every day, not all at once, but steadily, like drops of water wearing down stone. Comment in the hallway about his shoes. A smirk when he raised his hand to answer a question. A shared glance between Zach and Jaden when Elijah asked to sharpen his pencil. Still, Elijah said nothing. He kept showing up, kept completing his work with precision, kept offering polite nods to teachers. But each day, the light in his eyes dimmed a little more. The way he carried himself shifted, shoulders slightly more rounded, gaze slightly more downward. He was still trying to blend in, but the air around him crackled with invisible tension. His silence was not one of peace, it was the silence of a storm, waiting to be understood. No one had truly seen it yet, except maybe Lena. She caught herself staring once too long and quickly looked away, guilt pressing against her ribs like a stone she couldn't swallow. She told herself, tomorrow, I'll say something. But tomorrow came, and tomorrow went. Miss Thompson was the kind of teacher who inspired quiet obedience. She wasn't cruel. She didn't yell. Her voice was steady low and exacting, like a librarian who expected perfect behavior without having to ask twice. Her classroom ran on. Structure, rules were clear. Assignments were on the board by 8:01 a.m. every morning, and late homework was accepted with a signature and a consequence. She was respected, feared a little, maybe, but not disliked. By the third week of school, students had learned her rhythm. Speak when spoken to, don't interrupt. Write your name on every paper. She greeted each class with the same words, let's begin, and rarely smiled unless someone made a clever observation. Even then, her smile was fleeting, controlled. Elijah followed her rules religiously. He wrote neatly, double-checked his work, kept his desk clean. His eyes stayed on her when she lectured, and he never made a sound out of turn. If Ms. Thompson had been grading students on obedience alone, Elijah would have had a perfect score. And yet she said nothing, even as the whispers around him grew louder. Even as the jokes came more often. She said nothing when Jaden bumped Elijah's chair on purpose and muttered, "Oops, didn't see you there." She said nothing when Zach dropped his pencil and loudly asked, "Hey Elijah, mind picking that up? You look like you're used to it." A ripple of laughter followed, nervous, confused, complicit. Elijah froze for a moment, just a blink, then bent down, picked up the pencil, and placed it quietly on Zach's desk. From her place at the front of the room, Miss Thompson didn't flinch. She simply turned back to the board, uncapped her marker, and continued the math lesson. But Elijah noticed something. As he slid back into his chair, his eyes flicked up and caught hers. She was watching him, not just glancing, not casually. Surveying the class, watching him. Her eyes didn't hold warmth or cruelty, only something unreadable. Like she was cataloging something, measuring. Then, just as quickly, she turned away and opened the drawer of her desk. She pulled out a small, navy blue notepad, the kind she always carried but rarely used, and wrote something in it. Carefully, slowly, as if each word mattered. Elijah's heart beat louder in his ears, not from fear, not even from hope. Just from confusion. Why was she writing? Why not speaking? Later that day, Lena noticed the same thing. It was during a reading activity. Elijah had been placed in a group with Zach, Jaden, and 2 other boys. They were supposed to take turns reading paragraphs aloud. When it was Elijah's turn, he read with clear, steady words, his voice calm but sharp. When he finished, Zach leaned over and said under his breath, "You sound like a robot." "Is that how they talk where you're from?" Lena's stomach twisted. She waited for Miss Thompson to say something. She was only a few steps away, flipping through papers at her desk. But again, nothing. Instead, Miss Thompson slowly turned her head, looked at Elijah, and reached for that same navy notepad. She jotted something down. 1 line, maybe 2. Then she closed it. Class continued. And the silence around Elijah thickened. To the other students, it seemed like Miss Thompson didn't notice. But Elijah wasn't so sure anymore. There was something in the way she paused every time his name came up. The way her gaze lingered when the room got just a little too quiet after a joke at his expense. He had been in enough schools to know what true indifference looked like. Teachers who didn't care didn't watch the way she did. They didn't write things down. They didn't lean back in their chair at the end of class, staring at the wall with furrowed brows, as if lost in thought. But still, she said nothing. No detentions. No warnings. No conversations in the hallway. She didn't pull Zach aside. She didn't ask Elijah if he was okay. She just kept observing. Writing. Waiting. And to Elijah, that silence was worse than anger. It made him feel like he was part of an experiment. Like she was testing something, or worse, testing him. Lena felt it too. After class, she lingered behind once, pretending to tie her shoe. She watched as Ms. Thompson reached into her drawer, pulled out the notepad again, and stared at it for several seconds without writing. Lena almost spoke. But the words stayed in her throat. There was a quiet pressure in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm, when everything goes still and heavy. Something was coming. She just didn't know what, and neither did Elijah. It was a Thursday, just after lunch, and the air in room 214 felt unusually still. The sun pressed through the windows in thin beams, stretching shadows across the tiled floor like lines waiting to be crossed. Ms. Thompson stood at the front of the class, clipboard in hand. "Today we'll be doing a small group activity," she announced. "Each group will get a passage to analyze and present in 10 minutes. I've already assigned your teams." Groans echoed lightly through the room. Typical and harmless. Names were read aloud. Students gathered in their groups. Desks screeched slightly as they slid together. Papers shuffled. Whispered negotiations began. But Elijah remained seated. He glanced around subtly, trying not to draw attention. He wasn't called. His name hadn't been on any list. Ms. Thompson didn't correct it, didn't glance at him. She moved on. Lena noticed. Her brows furrowed as she glanced around at the shifting groups. Her own team, Zach, Jaden, Maya, and herself, had already started pulling chairs into a circle. Zach caught her looking and shrugged. "Guess he's solo," he muttered. Elijah didn't speak. He sat still at his desk, the only one left alone in the room, his hand resting quietly over the cover of his notebook. His eyes flickered to Ms. Thompson, who had returned to her desk and was writing something on her clipboard. The moment stretched tight and uncomfortable. Then Jaden said it low, under his breath, just loud enough to be heard by those nearby. "He probably didn't get a group because they ran out of cotton." The words struck the air like ice water. Lena froze mid-sentence. Even Zach's grin faltered, like he hadn't expected it to go that far. Elijah didn't move, not at first. For a second, he looked like a photograph frozen in time, suspended between impulse and pain. His eyes locked onto the table, unmoving, unblinking. A slow breath escaped through his nose. Then gently, as if asking permission from the silence itself, he pushed his chair back. The scraping noise wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. He stood up slowly. His hands were trembling fingers, twitching slightly as he gathered his notebook, holding it to his chest like a shield. His voice, when it came, was nearly inaudible. "Can I use the restroom?" Ms. Thompson looked up from her desk. For the briefest moment, her eyes held something: concern, guilt, recognition. But just as quickly, her face returned to neutral. She nodded once. "Go ahead." Elijah walked to the door with careful steps, not hurried, not slow, just measured, like he was balancing something fragile inside him that might shatter if he moved too fast. The door clicked closed behind him, and the room was silent. No one spoke. No one laughed. Not even Zach. Jaden stared at his desk, suddenly very interested in the corner of his worksheet. It was Lena who broke the stillness. She turned toward Jaden, her voice low but unwavering. "That's not funny." The words hit like a stone tossed into still water. All eyes turned to her. Not in anger, but in surprise. She wasn't loud. She wasn't yelling. But there was weight in her voice. Disbelief. disgust, something sharp that cut through the thick discomfort in the room. Jaden didn't respond. Neither did Zach. Lena didn't look away. She didn't add anything else. She didn't need to dot, and still Ms. Thompson said nothing. She looked at Lena, then at the empty seat where Elijah had sat, then back at her clipboard. She didn't scold, didn't interrupt, didn't ask for apologies or make a speech. She turned back to her notes, picked up her pen, and continued writing. The rest of the group work continued in fractured tension. Lena barely spoke for the rest of the activity. Her eyes kept drifting to the door, then to Miss Thompson, then back to the floor. Something inside her had shifted, subtle but firm. A quiet sense of responsibility that tasted like regret. When Elijah returned 10 minutes later, his face was unreadable. He walked back to his seat, sat down, and opened his notebook again. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't speak, but his hands were still shaking. Lena wanted to say something. Anything, but she didn't. Not yet. Miss Thompson glanced up at Elijah one more time before returning to her desk. And again, she wrote something in her notepad. As students trickled into room 214, yawning and half awake, they stopped one by one, just past the doorway. The desks were no longer arranged in rows. Instead, they had been carefully moved into a large circle. The familiar grid of separateness was gone. There was no front of the classroom anymore. No hierarchy. Just an open ring of seats, every student facing every other student. And on each desk, waiting silently, was a single printed page. Each student paused before sitting. Whispers broke out. What's going on? Where's Miss Thompson? Did we do something wrong? Lena approached her seat cautiously. Her heart beat faster than usual. Something about the air felt heavier, like the room itself was holding its breath. She picked up the sheet. At the top, in bold letters, were the words, "The price of silence." Below that, a single paragraph. It wasn't fiction. It wasn't a lesson prompt. It was a story. Tyrell was 11 when a group of students began calling him names during recess. His teacher saw it happen, but never said anything. Tyrell eventually stopped raising his hand. Then he stopped coming to school. By the time the teacher intervened, Tyrell had already transferred. He never went back to public school again. Lena blinked. Her eyes moved down the page. There were more lines, more names, different stories, some short, some chilling. One page over, Maya sat frozen, reading a paragraph about a girl named Janelle who had been mocked daily for her hair. Her teacher told her to ignore it. Janelle began pulling her hair into tighter and tighter buns. One day, she stopped talking altogether. Every student had a different story in front of them. Every story ended the same way, with silence winning. Zach stared down at his page, chewing the inside of his cheek. His leg bounced under the desk. For once, he had nothing clever to say. Then the door opened. Miss Thompson walked in. She carried no books, no lesson plan, just a small remote in her hand. She said nothing, only nodded once and walked to the front of the room, though in this new arrangement, there was no front. She tapped the remote. The screen behind her flickered to life. At first, it was just a black background. Then, slowly, an image faded in. It was Elijah. He sat alone in a chair, facing the camera, shoulders stiff but chin lifted. He wore the same hoodie from yesterday. But now, there was something else in his expression. Not fear, not anger. Just honesty, worn and quiet. His voice filled the room. This isn't the first school where this has happened to me. The class went still. Sometimes the bullying is loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's jokes people think don't matter. But it's always there. I try not to show it. I try not to let it get in, but it does. Lena felt her throat tighten. I've had teachers tell me I'm resilient, that I'm strong. But being strong doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. And the worst part isn't the kids who laugh. It's the teachers who say nothing. He paused. The camera didn't move. His eyes stayed steady. The room seemed to lean in. When teachers say nothing, it tells everyone else that it's okay, that I must deserve it, that my silence means I'm fine, but I'm not. The video faded to black. The silence in the room was deafening. Miss Thompson stepped forward. She let the quiet stretch a few seconds longer, as if letting the words settle deep into every corner of the classroom. Then she spoke softly, clearly. I saw everything. 24 heads turned toward her. I saw the jokes. I saw the looks. I saw the silence. And yes, I said nothing. Gasps rippled quietly. Some students looked confused. Others looked ashamed. Ms. Thompson continued. I stayed silent on purpose. I wanted you to see yourselves, to see each other, to feel the discomfort that Elijah lives with every day. She took a deep breath. Silence can be protection, but it can also be permission. I wanted you to reach your own breaking point. I hoped someone would say something sooner. Lena, she turned her eyes to the girl. Thank you for being first. Lena looked down, her face flushed, her jaw clenched. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just nodded. Ms. Thompson stepped forward again, eyes scanning the circle. Today we talk, we listen, and we learn. Not just from me, but from each other. She paused, and for the first time all year, her voice wavered slightly. This classroom is no longer just a place for math and reading. It's a place where every student deserves to be seen and heard. No one moved, but something had shifted. The circle of desks was still, but the silence was no longer empty. It was ready. The next day, when the students entered room 214, the desks were still in a circle, but this time, it didn't feel like a confrontation. It felt like a beginning. Ms. Thompson stood at the center, hands clasped gently in front of her. There was no clipboard, no textbook, no whiteboard filled with vocabulary or math problems. Just her and the quiet hum of a class waiting to see what would happen next. Her voice was steady, but softer than usual. From today forward, she said, Fridays in this classroom will look a little different. She looked around the circle, letting her gaze land on each face, without judgment, without accusation. We'll end each week with something I'm calling Circle Talks. This is your time. A space where we speak and listen with honesty and without fear. She let the words linger. No grades. No right answers. Just truth. Some students shifted in their seats. Unsure. Others looked curious. A few looked nervous. Miss Thompson continued. We all carry things we don't say out loud. Feelings, mistakes, regrets. Silence, as you've seen, can protect, but it can also wound. She paused. So today we begin with accountability. Not punishment, just truth. She looked at Zach, then at Jaden. Both boys stiffened slightly. Zach, Jaden, she said gently. Would you be willing to share something with the class? The room went still. Zach cleared his throat. His usual smirk was gone. He looked around at the circle, at Lena, at Elijah, whose gaze was steady but unreadable. Then he nodded. I didn't think it mattered, Zach said. The jokes. I thought they were just jokes. His voice cracked a little. He blinked fast, then looked down at his shoes. I didn't realize how much it could actually hurt someone. Or how fake it made me feel, laughing when I knew it wasn't right. Jaden went next, his voice quieter. I copied what Zach did. I didn't think for myself. I didn't even know why I said some of the stuff I said. It was like trying to get a laugh was more important than being decent. No one applauded. No one jeered. They just listened. And in that space, where there could have been shame, there was something else growing instead. Growth. Then Lena spoke. Her voice was firm, though her fingers trembled slightly where they clutched the side of her desk. Elijah, she said, meeting his eyes. I should have said something sooner. I saw what was happening. I felt it. And I stayed quiet because I was scared of what people would think of me. But that wasn't fair to you. Her breath caught for a second. I'm sorry. Elijah didn't answer right away, but he looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, his posture softened not defensively, but open. He gave a small nod. A single, quiet gesture, but it spoke volumes. In the weeks that followed, something began to change. The circle talks continued, each one peeling back new layers. Students started opening up about pressure at home, about fears of not fitting in, about feeling small even when they acted big. For the first time, room 214 didn't just feel like a classroom. It felt like a community. And Elijah? He began to speak. At first, just in small ways, a hand raised halfway during a discussion, a softly spoken answer, a thoughtful observation about a character in a story. Ms. Thompson never rushed him, never called on him without consent. But she watched him bloom with the same quiet attention she had once given in silence. One Friday, he shared in the circle. When I walk into a room, he said, I always look for where I'll sit. Who will notice me? Who won't? And for a long time, I thought not being noticed was the safest thing. He paused, but I don't want to be invisible anymore. A hush settled over the room. Not awkward - reverent. Something sacred had been spoken. Then, on a Wednesday 2 weeks later, Ms. Thompson announced a new group project. She read off the list of names and tasks, just like usual. Students shuffled their desks. Discussions started. Forming. And then Elijah stood up. I'll go first, he said. 5 words. That's all, but in that moment, it felt like the loudest thing he'd ever said. He walked over to the whiteboard, picked up a marker, and started outlining the group's idea. His voice was clear, steady, confident. Lena smiled from her seat. Zach and Jaden watched, quiet, but this time with respect. And Ms. Thompson? She didn't write anything in her notebook. She just watched. And smiled. It was late Friday afternoon, and sunlight spilled through the tall windows of room 214 in golden streaks. Dust floated in the warm light like glitter, dancing gently above the heads of 24 students. Gathered around the center of the room, there was laughter, real laughter, not nervous, not mocking, not whispered behind backs. The kind that comes from shared effort, inside jokes, and the comfort of being seen. Desks had once again been moved into a circle, though by now, no one questioned it. It was just how things were. Elijah sat between Lena and a boy named Marcus, a wide smile on his face as he laughed at something Lena had just said. His shoulders were relaxed. His notebook lay open beside him, filled not only with assignments, but small sketches in the margins, ideas, shapes, thoughts he no longer felt the need to keep hidden. Ms. Thompson stood nearby watching. She didn't interrupt, didn't redirect. She simply observed, with the kind of quiet pride that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. In the center of the circle sat a simple cardboard box labeled Next Week's Questions. Inside were anonymous prompts students had written, to be discussed in the next circle talk. Topics ranged from, why do people bully, to what makes someone brave. Ms. Thompson would read them all over the weekend, but for now, she let the moment breathe, because this was what she had been waiting for. The laughter, the light, the unspoken unity. A class that, not long ago, had been divided by silence and fear, was now stitched together with something stronger than rules or routines. Understanding. Across the room, Jaden offered Elijah a pen that had rolled off his desk. Elijah accepted it with a simple, thanks. No hesitation. No awkwardness. Just human kindness. Zach, from the other side of the circle, chimed in with a joke that made half the class groan and the other half giggle. Even Ms. Thompson cracked a smile. And then the bell rang, chairs squeaked, papers rustled, backpacks zipped shut, but no one rushed for the door. They moved slowly, chatting, finishing sentences. Some lingered in small clusters. It was no longer about just surviving the school day. Something had changed, and in the middle of it all, Elijah stood and laughed unafraid. Voiceover, soft, reflective tone. Justice isn't always about big actions. Sometimes it begins with one voice refusing to stay silent. A single hand raised. A quiet, "That's not funny." A teacher choosing to listen before speaking. The truth is, no one is born courageous. But courage grows in places where people are finally seen. As the classroom slowly emptied, Miss Thompson collected the leftover question slips and glanced one last time at the quiet box in the center. Then she looked up. Elijah was the last one out the door. He turned back for a second, catching her eye, and smiled, not shyly, not cautiously, just genuinely. She smiled back, then nodded once. It was enough. Moral message, delivered in closing narration. True education isn't just about math or reading. It's about learning to see each other fully, beyond skin, beyond silence, beyond fear. It's about building a space where every voice matters, where students are not just taught, but understood, and where the courage to stand becomes contagious. Because in a world full of noise, sometimes the most powerful sound is someone choosing to speak. As the hallway filled with footsteps and lockers clanking shut, room 214 stood, quiet again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't the silence of avoidance. It was the silence that follows healing. Sacred hush left behind by voices that had at last been heard. And among them, Elijah's was no longer alone.